Welcome back to the New Zealand Property Insights. We're the owners of Property Apprentice. And as always, we're here to help you navigate the New Zealand property market with the real facts, not just the scary headlines.
Today, we're opening episode 19 with a look at some of the most encouraging structural shifts we'd seen in months. While the mainstream news is heavily focused on flat national statistics, we're shining a light on some remarkable windows of opportunity that are quietly opening up for strategic buyers and tenants alike.
We started with an extensive look at the newly released Regional Rental Affordability Index, examining why local rental pressures are finally balancing out, while our neighbours across the Tasman head into deeper rental stress due to highly restrictive budget, tax changes, and loss of interest deductibility.
That should be another warning for our government in New Zealand. Look what happened last time, and they're about to do it again if we get a change of government.
Yeah.
And so be careful who you vote for. We're also going to break down Trademe Property's newly released Winter Pulse survey data to reveal the exact behaviour behind buyer shortlists, illustrating why Canterbury is holding up extraordinarily good level of buyer interest right now.
And to wrap things up, we're examining a highly debated government proposal to remove minimum apartment sizes and balconies, exposing the major financing traps and future resale rules that buyers must understand before jumping in. This episode is packed with positive, strategic insights to help you get ahead. So let's get straight in.
So segment one, the Trans-Tasman rental split, easing local burden versus Australian policy stress. Kicking off this segment with the latest figures from the Regional Rental Affordability Index released by property firm Property Brokers and the Property Knowledge led by Professor Graham Squires. The data reveals that rental affordability improved across nearly every region of New Zealand over the past year, driven by a combination of easing rents and rising regional earnings.
This report highlights a major structural shift. While our local rental market is showing clear signs of rebalancing, Australia is moving into a deeper rental stress as their weekly rents outpace wage growth across both capital cities and regional markets. So let's lay out the deep facts. According to Regional Rental Affordability Index, typical tenancy costs across New Zealand now require 39% of a single job's monthly payout, which represents a year-on-year drop of 5%. That's got to be better than what they're expecting overseas and also what we previously had here. So national media sources note that multiple income streams are typically pulled by local households to meet their weekly rental commitments. Main data centres indicate that house renters in Auckland allocate 39% of their earnings to rent, while in Canterbury households use 38%, and Wellington renters enjoy the lowest major centre ratio at 35%.
With an average rent of $433 per week, the West Coast stands as the most budget-friendly market in the country, requiring just 31% of a typical worker's pay. The most dramatic regional turn occurred in Hawke's Bay, where a weekly rental drop of $53 gave tenants a 9% boost in affordability, followed by a solid $42 a week reduction in Wellington. And this brings us back to the usual thing that we talk about, which is supply and demand. You know, there's clearly lower demand from tenants, as we said in the previous Property Insights, with people staying home longer before going rental, but also more rental properties are available in the market at the moment in some areas. So that supply and demand imbalance is playing out and reducing rents across the country in different areas.
These findings mirror official numbers from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, which tracked a 3% boost in traditional tenants' affordability for 2025, continuing a recovery trend that took off in late 2023. Capital City affordability gains reached an 11% high in September 2025 before settling at 8% by December. As rents drop and wage growth began to slow down, New Zealand's median rental burden sits at about 25.5% of household disposable income, remaining slightly higher than Australia's national average of 23%.
Property management leaders point out that New Zealand and Australia are on completely opposite trajectories due to contrasting policy setups. The Trans-Tasman policy gap widened in May when Australia's federal government announced tax changes starting in July 2027 that restrict negative gearing benefits on older homes bought after May 12, 2026. Under these Australian changes, property write-offs can no longer be used to offset regular salary income, meaning tax losses can only be applied directly against rent or future capital gains. Industry advocates note that limiting these tax offsets to brand new builds will likely push investors out of the market, squeeze supply, and therefore drive Australian rents up. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Very familiar.
Yeah, very familiar. We've had this in New Zealand before. They should have learnt from our lesson.
Yeah, so then you'll have new builds that go up far too much in value, and then they'll drop.
Bubble.
Yeah.
Another bubble.
So leading real estate networks warn that many of Australia's 2.9 million renters cannot easily buy their homes, so leaving them highly exposed to policy-driven rental shortages and increases. Some economists argue that local rent prices are fundamentally set by what tenants can realistically afford to pay, rather than the landlord's holding costs. So credit data shows that Kiwi investor interest began returning in early 2024, right as the phase out of interest deductibility was reversed, and the bright line test was shortened again. Market analysis suggests that local rental space is beginning to stabilize, but warn that rents will likely stay flat for the next 3 to 4 years as townhouse supply continues to flood the market.
When you look at the economic data here, it proves that policy settings matter immensely. David Faulkner's commentary is a perfect warning for what happens when a government attempts to tax its way to a healthy housing market. When the previous government here removed interest deductibility while mortgage rates climbed, it made rental portfolios structurally unviable, forcing cost pass-throughs that hurt tenants. And obviously you can't increase market rent more than market rent. But when there's limited supply of rental properties available, then that can have a huge impact. So if landlords are forced to sell their rentals, that creates a shortage.
Yeah. And don't forget, if it's like petrol, if it goes up at the barrel, it goes up at the pump. So it's an identical concept playing out across the ditch. By cutting negative gearing on existing homes, Australia is creating a different environment of artificial constriction that leaves tenants highly vulnerable. Here in New Zealand, the return of regulatory certainty, especially the restoration of the full interest deductibility, has successfully stabilized investor confidence and allowed rental supply to expand and allow our tenants to be in homes longer.
I agree. And looking at Shamabil Yakub's point that rents are governed by a tenant's ability to pay, I mean, it's determined by market rent, to be fair, but certainly it gets to a point where, tenants can only afford what tenants can afford. It does highlight why a long-term tenant approach is required. With Faulkner predicting a 3 to 4 year period of flat rents nationally due to incoming townhouse supply, investors just can't rely on automatic annual rent increases to cover poor financial structures. Success in a flat or balanced market requires complete pricing and debt discipline. You need a personalised financial plan that helps to focus on stable cash flowing assets rather than speculative growth. And that's exactly what we help everyday Kiwis navigate by stripping emotion completely out of the math. When you're investing in property, you want to take as much emotion out of that process as possible. You're not a home buyer, you're an investor.
Absolutely. Segment 2, suburb search behavior, short list strategies, and regional demand drivers. For our second topic, we're diving into the brand new survey from TradeMe, Property's Winter Pulse report, which reveals exactly how buyers are structuring their property searches as we move into the winter season.
And this is a really good look behind the scenes. By analysing buyer habit, the data captures everything from how narrow a suburb shortlist typically is to the exact locations completely dominating online buyer search volumes across the country right now. So let's have a look at the facts. The TradeMe Property Winter Pulse survey collected insights from 2,000 New Zealanders in May 2026 to track buyer intentions and geographic search habits. Most home hunters keep their geographic target relatively focused, with 38% of buyers looking across 2 to 3 suburbs and 30% looking at 4 to 6 locations. Only a small minority of 11% restrict their house hunt to a single suburb, while 16% expand their search across 7 or more areas.
When organising their searches, buyers are evenly divided, with 43% searching highly localised area and another 43% spreading their focus across several district suburb clusters. Only 13% of prospective buyers are willing to expand their property search across entirely different regions of the country. Price, neighbourhood, safety, and commute times, amenities that are close to you caused over 40% of active buyers to remove at least one suburb from their target list. Auckland dominates national buyer attention, with those listings taking 8 out of the top 10 spots on the country's most searched listings for May.
Within the Auckland market, Mount Eden and Remuera are virtually tied for the top spot, with Remuera trailing by a tiny margin of 0.3%. Outside of the Auckland region, only Mirrorvale and Cashmere in Christchurch managed to break into the national top 10 list, ranking 7th and 9th respectively. When Auckland data is set aside, Christchurch completely dominates the rankings by taking every single spot in the regional top 10, proving extremely strong buyer interest in Canterbury. Understandably, because it's a lot more affordable in Canterbury than it is here in Auckland. But the winter findings were compared against a broader baseline survey of 3,785 respondents conducted in March 2026 to ensure the accuracy of these trends.
So what stands out to me is that more than 40% of buyers are actively cutting suburbs from their list due to cost, safety, or travel distance. It tells you that even in a quieter winter market, smart buyers are using clear, non-negotiable criteria to filter out locations that just don't make sense. And they're keeping their parameters strict because there's plenty of properties to look at, and we're in a buyer's market.
Absolutely. And it does make me wonder about some of these developments where there's no off-street parking as well. You know, the majority of New Zealanders do still use vehicles to get to their day jobs. But, you know, this is what we try to encourage people to think. It's how we try to encourage people to think. Buying a home can easily become an emotional process, like we said before, but long-term wealth creation means that you need to treat property investing like a business and remove as much of that emotion out of the process as possible. If a suburb doesn't align with your cash flow requirements or for the tenant demand, your budget or your safety metrics, you must drop it from the list before you make an expensive mistake.
Absolutely. And you look at the Christchurch data completely sweeping the top 10 spots. And then you take Auckland out of the equation. Canterbury is clearly holding immense buyer interest. But as an investor, you still have to look at the past general city boundaries and look at the micro market performance of individual streets and property types.
Now on to segment 3, the Shoebox apartment debate, minimum size deregulation and lending hurdles. Our final segment today, we're diving into a major regulatory shift currently being considered by the government that could completely change urban density in New Zealand. The proposal to eliminate minimum apartment sizes and mandatory features like balconies has sparked a substantial national debate.
While mainstream headlines are screaming about the return of shoebox apartments, the underlying reality for buyers and property investors is far more nuanced. This policy change highlights a notable shift in how city living is evolving, but it also uncovers some hidden traps when it comes to bank financing and the future resale value. So let's lay out those directly. The government is reviewing a proposal to eliminate legal minimum size limits and mandatory balcony designs for apartment builds in New Zealand. Supporters argue that removing size rules will provide cheaper entry-level housing options to tackle the shortage, while some critics express concern over the potential of low-quality living spaces. Real estate portal data also shows that smaller urban units appeal strongly to students, singles and first-time buyers, who prioritise being close to the city amenities over having extra space.
And that makes sense too, doesn't it? Because those smaller apartments are often at the lower price point. So for students in particular, that makes, living independently a lot easier financially. But property data experts point out that removing legal limits will not automatically trigger an explosion of tiny, unlivable apartments across the country. This sounds really familiar. Do you remember them talking about how the apartments in Auckland were going to be the ghettos of the future because there were lots of shoebox apartments? And that didn't happen because it all boils down to supply and demand. There's only a certain number of people that are going to like the idea of living in those types of things. And ultimately, market demand will dictate developer plans, as apartments that are built too small compared to their competitors will struggle to find buyers or tenants. Historical data shows the average New Zealand apartment dimensions have remained stable over the last 10 years, proving the market naturally maintains its own comfortable size floor.
While apartments currently present less than 5% of the country's total housing stock, high-density city living is becoming a standard lifestyle option in our growing cities. Modern Kiwis are increasingly moving away from the traditional quarter-acre backyard dream in favour of a lock-up and leave lifestyles close to work and public transport so they can go on holiday,
And on the financing side, retail banks remain highly cautious, enforcing much stricter lending rules on smaller apartments, typically those that fall below about 40 to 45 square metres. Lending limitations can severely restrict your future exit strategy by shrinking the pool of potential buyers who can secure a mortgage to purchase your property later on. Even if minimum sizes are deregulated, all new multi-unit developments must still legally comply with New Zealand building codes regarding health, safety and ventilation.
The proposal really highlights how much the traditional Kiwi dream is changing. People are working differently, spending more time out of the home, and completely shifting away from maintenance costs of a standalone property in favour of pure convenience close to central amenities. But from an investment perspective, removing size restrictions does not mean developers can just build whatever they want.
Exactly. Market demand is the ultimate filter. If an apartment's structurally too cramped, it'll simply sit vacant or become a high-risk asset. But what buyers really need to focus on here is the section on bank lending. As Vanessa Williams pointed out, banks are incredibly cautious when it comes to lending on anything under 45 square metres. If you sign a contract without understanding those strict lending boundaries, you could struggle to get lending altogether.
A significant hurdle that newbies miss all the time. If fewer buyers can get a mortgage on a property, permanently shrinks your future resale pool. It shows why property investing should never be based on guesswork or emotional reactions to recent headlines. You have to understand the specific trade-offs and rules of apartment lending before risking your hard-earned capital.
It really does come down to building a plan that prioritises risk reduction and proper due diligence. You can't look at a flat national market or a policy change and assume it's a one-size-fits-all situation. You've got to crunch the numbers, look at your personal borrowing capacity and know what the exact parameters are of the local micro market before you make a move.
So that wraps up episode 19 of the New Zealand Property Insights. We've analysed the shifting Trans-Tasman rental dynamic, the behavioural analytics behind buyers' shortlists, and the major financing rules shaping the apartment density.
If looking at these local shifts and flat national tracking has made you realise that you need a better handle on your cash flow structures, or if you want to learn how to establish clear buying parameters before scrolling through online listings, our team is here to help.
We run completely free online educational events called How to Succeed with Property Investing. It's highly practical, data-backed session designed to show you exactly how to establish your buying rules, maximize your lending capacity with independent mortgage advisors, and evaluate micro market demand data safely.
There's absolutely no sales pressure or obligation to purchase because our company doesn't sell property. You can find the registration link directly in our show notes or simply go to propertyapprentice.co.nz to secure your free spot today.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.